We are here to help inform you on what it means to become non-exempt. All of you should have received a notification saying that as a result of changes in the Fair Labor Standards Act, your position is moving from exempt to non-exempt. And we are having these instructional forums for all employees who are affected to give you a little bit more information on what that's all about. A couple of housekeeping items. We will have time for questions, but we are asking that you hold those questions till the end. This is a very comprehensive presentation so that you're not only going to hear from me, but you're going to also hear from other members of the Office of Human Resources, including members from payroll benefits, from workforce relations, as well as benefit services. So we're going to give you a whole approach, so it's very possible that we might be able to answer your question during the presentation. So that's why we also ask that we hold questions till the end. We're also recording this presentation. The presentation will be posted, we believe, next week, so that if you have colleagues or others who have were unable to make it today, we'll have the presentation available for them to view, and also get this information. So that will also be available. Sorry. With that, again, thank you so much for coming, and we will get started. Hopefully you also grabbed the handouts in the back of the room. If you did not get your handouts, can you raise your hand and Rob can get those to you? Fantastic, thank you. Keep your hands raised, I'll be right back. And also you could have also received a note card, and you received note cards. If you would like to write your questions down as you go through, feel free to write them on that note card. We can also collect those as we go through the question and answer period if you would like us to, and we can answer questions off the note cards as well. Okay, so thank you. So after this session, you'll be able to identify what changed in the Fair Labor Standards Act, what this means to you, the actions that you may need to take as a result of this change, and then also trying to sort resources for you to answer any questions you may have. So our agenda for today, again, is what is changing. We're going to take you to a quick overview of the Fair Labor Standards Act, so some of you may not have even heard of this thing, and what, all of a sudden it's having this effect on how you track your time. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about what this means for you in terms of, as I said, payroll benefits, paid leave, and then scheduling of hours and work time, recording of work time. And then resources, and again, we'll have time for Q&A. We've had a good amount of time for Q&A, so no worries about that. So, moving forward. No.
Hi, I'm Allison Niles. I'm the payroll manager in OHR, and I'm just going to get us started because really this is about payroll. There's a bunch of technical things about why this is happening and what the law means, but really this comes down to how and when you're paid. So if you do the next slide. So becoming non-exempt for FLSA changes how you report time. It doesn't change your employee classification. It doesn't change your employee category. None of those things are changing. Your vacation and sick leave earnings are staying the same. And if you're a graduate assistant, project assistant, your tuition remission is also going to stay the same. Next slide. Becoming non-exempt does change your overtime eligibility. So it means that if you work 40 hours in a work week, and then you work one more hour, that 41st hour, we as your employer are required to pay you time and a half. So if that's something that you might see, where you might be working over 40 hours in a work week, now you get time and a half. In order to track that, you have to be paid hourly. It doesn't change the policies around whether or not you're working overtime. It doesn't change the policies that you already are under. It doesn't change your job duties, and it doesn't change your supervisor. We had a forum for supervisors just yesterday. A lot of supervisors came out to better understand how this would affect their employees. Your HR reps are also talking to your supervisors about this, and you should as well. So you get your expectations straight about your time. And now Megan's going to talk about compensation and titling.
Okay, so first we'll start with just an overview of the Fair Labor Standards Act. What is this? The overview of the Fair Labor Standards Act was set in 1938, enacted in 1938, to protect individuals in terms of fair wages and labor hours. So it encompasses protections including child labor laws, it includes the overtime provisions, it includes minimum wage. These are all parts of the Fair Labor Standards Act. The part that we're talking, that everyone is covered under this law. The difference is that some people are exempted from it and some people are not exempt. So the definitions of exempt and non-exempt. An exempt employee is not subject to overtime provisions and is considered salaried, quote unquote. The non-exempt employee is subject to protections outlined in the FLSA and ensures that everyone receives overtime compensation. So you will receive over any time that you work an hour, you get paid for that hour. Little side by side here, exempt employees are paid a salary. Non-exempt employees are paid hourly. We have to pay hourly in order to pay per hour worked. Exempt employees, normally they do not receive any additional compensation if you work over 40 hours in a week. Or in our cases, if you are a 50% employee and you work 25 hours, you do not receive additional compensation for those 5 hours. As a non-exempt employee, overtime pay or compensatory pay, which we'll also cover during this presentation, is required for every hour. Okay. So, in order to be exempt from the FLSA, so somebody where the overtime provisions do not apply, you must meet 3 tests. The first test is the salary basis test. How are you compensated? So is the work that you do compensated for on a salary basis or compensated for on an hourly basis? The next test is what we call the minimum salary test. So currently in order to be exempt under the Fair Labor Standards Act, you must receive a salary of $455 a week or $23,660 annually. This is what is changing on January 1. The third test, which is the duty of discretion test, means that you must meet their definition, the Department of Labor's definition of a professional, an executive, administrative professional, or a computer professional. So you have to meet one of those definitions. Okay. What has changed? On September 24th, the Department of Labor issued a new ruling that says the new minimum salary test will be raised to $35,568 a year, $684 a week, or for our C-basis employees, $29,101 per year. This is what has changed. Teachers, doctors, and lawyers are always exempt. If you are a practicing attorney, a practicing doctor, or a teacher, you are always exempt from the minimum salary threshold test. That does not apply to you. For those employees that are not one of those, then you are subject to that minimum threshold. That is what has changed. When does this take effect? January 1 of 2020. I will say that we did actually try and get this extended, and we're actually many areas in higher education tried to get this date extended. We're not successful because there was no grace period allotted to us by the federal government, so this is where we're at. We do recognize that the timing is not ideal, with it being around the holidays. So who is affected? So if your earnings are below the new minimum salary, then your employment status may be non-exempt unless you meet one of the teacher, doctor, lawyer exemption. Some academic staff may qualify as an academic administrator, but we don't have any of those in the room today. And then some exempt university staff and non-instructional academic staff may also become non-exempt. So the threshold test, so you're aware, is not your base salary. It is your actual take-home pay. So I give the example. If you are currently a 50% employee with a base salary of $60,000, your actual pay under the Fair Labor Standards Act is $30,000. Therefore, you are subject to the law. You fall underneath the threshold. Oh, how are you affected? Your employment category will not change. Allison talked about that earlier. Your professional role, your duties are not changing. your role, the duties that you perform are still considered exempt. They meet the definition of exempt under the Fair Labor Standards Act. That has not changed. If you're not already paid biweekly, you will transition to be paying on a biweekly payroll. So you'll be paid every 2 weeks. We'll talk about that later. You will need to report out hours worked in 15-minute increments as well as leave taken. And all hours worked over 40 in a work week require some sort of compensation, whether it be comp time or cash. Okay. We do have the side-by-sides. I'm hoping you, when you received your notification, your invitation to come to this meeting, you should have also received a side-by-side, which kind of went through some of the things that will be changing and then also what will not be changing. Most of the information is things that are not changing. We've also then had at the front, there are 2 calendars that we handed out to individuals when they walked in. One of them is the A basis calendar and one of them is the C basis calendar. If you are an individual that's paid over 12 months, you are an A basis calendar person. If you're an individual that's paid over 9 months, you're a C basis calendar person. So as we move through this presentation, we'll be referencing those calendars, so you might want to grab the one that refers to you. Okay. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Tim.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Delaney. I'm with the payroll office at OHR. I want to start with the A basis calendar that everyone has. Is that too loud? Okay, sounds loud to me. All right. So as an A basis employee, your last monthly check will be January 2nd, and that will cover December 1st to December 31st, and you'll get your last full monthly check. Because this goes into effect January 1st, your first biweekly pay period is the last 4 days of that biweekly pay period. So January 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. That short pay period will be paid on January 16th. Your first full biweekly pay period is the 5th through the 18th of January, and that will be paid on January 30th. And then you will go, each pay period is the next 2 weeks, and you're paid every other Thursday from that point forward. We understand that that short pay period is going to cause some issues. We're going to talk a little bit about how we're going to help you guys out with the benefits part of that when Jennifer comes up and we talk about the benefits part of it. But we do acknowledge that starting with the first and not being able to pick the beginning of a whole pay period, we've got that little weird couple days that we'll have to get paid out and before we guys get you into the regular pattern of the biweekly pay period. The pay period that has the first of the month in it is considered our A pay period. As monthly employees, all your deductions have come out of every paycheck. But when we switch to biweekly, we have A and B pay periods in which your deductions come out of. Your A pay period has the bulk of the deductions, including the health insurance. Okay? Your B paycheck has the state group L or state group life and the 403B, those types of payments. So you'll end up kind of with not even paychecks. You'll end up with a smaller A paycheck because of the deductions if you have benefit deductions, and then a slightly larger B paycheck because you don't have as many deductions coming out of that. As biweekly employees, you will get paid 26 times a year. So we have 2 extra, thank you. We have 2 extra pay periods, and those are C paychecks. And that's going to be important when we talk about the benefits. The C paychecks that happen twice a year don't have any benefit deductions other than those that are percentage based, like your WRS, if you're WRS eligible, or your 403B and 457 paycheck or deductions. If you are a C basis employee, on January 2nd, you're going to get your last full monthly pay period or paycheck. But because the pay period for C basis employees is not the 1st to the 31st, the January 2nd covers from November 19th to December 18th. When you switch to biweekly on January 1st, you're going to have that same little 4-day pay period that's paid on the 16th. You'll have your first full biweekly B paycheck that's going to be paid on the 30th. But then on the 31st, you're going to get your last partial monthly paycheck, which is going to cover December 19th through December 31st. So you'll have monthly, a small biweekly, a regular biweekly, and then a small monthly for C-basis employees. And then you will be on the every 2 week schedule like all the biweekly schedules. We talked about that. Just a reminder, A basis, your last full monthly is on January 2nd. You're going to get 16 for 4 days. And then on the 30th, you will get the 14-day pay period. Here's a list of the deductions that come out of the pay periods, either by the A, the B, and then the C. As you can see, the A payroll has a lot more deductions on it. That's going to be personalized depending on what benefit deductions you've signed up for. There's a link to the payroll calendar. I recommend that everyone goes to the link and prints out a payroll calendar until you get used to the new schedule. It will list the days of the pay period and when that is paid. Earning statements. With the switch, and as always, we recommend everyone review their earning statements. Now that you have to record your hours and your supervisor has to approve your hours, you're going to want to check your earning statement to make sure you got paid for all of the hours you worked in that pay period. As a reminder, to get to your earning statements, you go through the MyUW portal. You're going to click on the earning statements or the payroll information widget for your earning statements, and then you'll click on your earning statement to see it. It will list the pay period and how many hours, your hourly rate, and your grand total of getting paid. Tax withholdings. No action is needed. Your taxes won't change, but I do want to point out that if you have a flat additional amount being withheld every paycheck, that will continue, but now it's going to happen 26 times. So if you have $100 extra going to federal tax, if you don't alter that, you'll now have 100 happen 26 times instead of the 9 or 12 that you expected. There's no mechanism in place to switch that automatically. You'll have to turn in a new W-4. We need those W-4s at OHR by Friday, January 3rd to catch the first pay period. Give us time to get them entered. Please don't submit them over email because your social security number is on the form. Direct deposit. You don't need to make any changes to your direct deposit. You will just now start to receive 26 deposits instead of 9 or 12. But again, if you have a flat amount going to a secondary direct deposit account, you're going to want to update your direct deposit to account for the more paychecks. The system will not automatically adjust to you now having more paychecks. So if you have 500 going into savings, you're probably going to want to lower that a little bit. You can do that via self-service right now to the MyUW portal. If you take the van pool, you're going to need to reach out to your van pool coordinator. We'll leave the forms in OHR again by January 3rd so we can update. If you are donating to Partners in Giving, you're going to want to send an email to us to let us know what you want your new deduction to be per paycheck. We'll make the adjustment for you. Transportation services, if you have parking, is aware of the population this is affecting, and they're going to automatically adjust it from the 12 to 9 paychecks to the 26 for you guys. But if you have questions, you can email the customer service at transportation. If you have a 403B, same thing. If you have a flat amount going into this, you're going to adjust it for the new number of paychecks. Same with Wisconsin deferred comp. If you don't take action and you have one of these, you will have more taken out of your paycheck than you probably want. Garnishments shouldn't need any action, but as always, review your earnings statement to make sure that these are being handled properly. They should be adjusted automatically by the service center. If you have questions, you can email the service center at ag1.wis.edu. They handle all garnishments. All right. How many people people here by show of hands held at least held the job where they had to record their hours here at the UW, whether it was a student hourly, a TE, something. So for you, this is going to be easy. You just have to remember what you did a year or two ago, and you'll be able to just duplicate the same thing. For everybody else, you are now going to have to actively record your hours onto a timesheet so that you can get paid. We have asked all divisions to consider putting in default schedules for all of you. This default schedule will populate based off of how many hours a week you're supposed to be working per your FTE. And if for some reason, because it's new, you forget to go in and put in your hours, there will be a set of hours in there that your supervisor can approve and that you guys will get a paycheck. If you have a schedule, you will need to go in and modify the schedule if your work schedule changes. So if you have a Monday through Friday, 8 or 4 hours a day schedule, but you work 8 on Monday and you take Tuesday off, you're going to need to go in there and change Monday to 8 hours and change Tuesday to 0 hours. You need the timesheet to match what you actually worked to the quarter hour. So to access the timesheet, you're going to go to your MyUW and click on the time and absence widget. It'll click a link to the timesheet, and if you have multiple jobs, it will actually list the job, and you have to select the one that's appropriate. This is what your timesheet is going to look like. All you do is for the day you work, you put in the total number of hours you worked that day to the quarter hour. Now, if you work multiple times a day, your division or department may want you to list those as separate shifts so that they can monitor what you're doing. Easy enough. Hit the little plus sign. You can make as many Sundays or Mondays as you want, and you can list all the shifts separately. That's going to be a division and department decision as to how they want you to record your hours. If they want it by a shift or as a total. If you have a schedule and you don't work, you click on the minus sign to delete the schedule, to delete that shift, and then you'll just adjust for the other shifts that you worked more in. Change the hours on any day that don't match the schedule if you have one. After all the hours have been entered and submitted, or entered, you hit submit, and then it will go to your supervisor to approve. Your division will work with you when they meet with you to establish the time frame of when they expect you to have your timesheet fully entered and submitted so that the supervisor has time to enter it and do that. Typically, for employees, it's usually that Friday or Saturday at the end of the pay period to have all of their hours submitted. So when the supervisor comes in Monday morning, they've got the completed timesheet to work with. If for some reason you forget, make sure you are reaching out to your supervisor and your payroll office to let them know that you're a little behind, you're still adjusting to the process, and they can make sure those hours get entered and paid. Yep.
So, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Wismiller. I am benefit manager with the Office of Human Resources. So, this is really just a list of all of the slide before that you saw with the A pay period, the B pay period, and the C pay period. Really kind of, it actually kind of mirrors this slide. This is the list of all of the benefits that actually come out. Usually, you see these, obviously, getting paid once a month, you're going to see them all on your check. Granted, the only ones that you will see on all checks are going to be if you have a 403B, a 457, and your WRS. Okay? So otherwise, it will be referred to the other schedule, the A, B, and C schedule. Okay, so we talked, or I think it was Megan that possibly, or Tim that mentioned, we understand that the very first A payroll that you get is going to be possibly a maximum of 4 days. So what we have decided to do is two options. On your 12M payroll, which is your January 2nd payroll, you do have the option of asking to prepay your January, which, your January deductions. So they basically take two deductions. Now, we understand, and it was Megan that actually had indicated, because of the holidays, that might pose a hardship. Obviously, there are some people that don't want two deductions coming out in December. So what we have done is, the other option that you're going to have is, and you should probably touch base with your supervisor, or you can go ahead and email OHR directly yourselves, that's fine. If you want to prepay, you just email us, let us know you want to prepay it. You do have to email us though by tomorrow. I know that that's very, very short notice. However, they are going to load all of these on Sunday for that payroll. So you'll want to contact our office to make sure that we can get that in for you before that payroll runs. The other option, and for those of you, even if you don't answer, it's going to default, actually, we are going to override your benefits on the 1A. So that first paycheck, that is very few days, we're just going to stop all deductions on there. So the paycheck that you're going to get, you won't see, with the exception, I do have an exception, with the exception of 403B, WDC, and WRS. Those will still come out. But health, health benefits, life insurance, those type of things, we will actually override. And what we're going to do then is set up pay lines for you, actually on our 2C payroll. And so that, typically we do not have any benefits coming out of a C payroll. So you won't see duplicates. And that was actually our first opportunity. It's actually, typically we don't have a C payroll until like either March or April. So it was kind of good timing for this year on the 2C. So we have worked that out with our service center that they are allowing that to be deferred. Okay. Once again, please, oh, and actually, I'm sorry, I should look back at the screen. Any deductions that are over $30, we are automatically going to do that 2C. So if we didn't hear from you and you have health insurance, which is usually over $30, we're going to automatically do that. However, if you have just, let's say, VSP, and it's single coverage at $6.38, we are going to let those take on that 1A payroll, just because it is such a minimum charge. Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Megan DeZuba from Workforce Relations. I'm going to be talking to you about paid leave and standard hours. And all of this information will be available later online, so I won't read line by line for you, and you don't have to jot absolutely everything down. So regarding sick leave, personal holiday leave, and vacation, most stuff is not changing. What is changing if you have staff moving from exempt to non-exempt is the leave reporting. So they'll no longer be completing monthly leave reports, and now they'll need to report leave time in 15-minute increments. Additionally, supervisors will need to review hours worked and leave taken biweekly. For the university staff moving from non-exempt to exempt, there is an elapsed timesheet where they're able to report in 4 or 8-hour increments. Who is eligible for overtime or comp time? As a reminder, the division will determine if folks can be paid overtime or if they'll have to use comp time. So check with your division HR for the rules for your specific division. But this talks about if your FLSA status is non-exempt, whether or not you're eligible for these things or not. If you're university staff or academic staff A basis and you're non-exempt, you're eligible. C basis academic staff not eligible. Post-degree trainee and program or project assistants on a 12-month appointment are eligible and it's tracked informally. And then those on a 9-month appointment are not eligible. For the exempt time, the only one that is different here is for university staff. They may be eligible based on division or unit policy. For the rest of those folks, formal comp time is not permitted, and nor is overtime if they're not qualifying for the comp time. We wanted to provide some reminders just about the differences between overtime and comp time. Just as a refresher, this information is available in the campus overtime policy as well. So this covers the fact that overtime pay is earned by a non-exempt employee working more than 40 hours in a work week
Our campus work weeks are considered Sunday through Saturday. And they're compensated at time and a half if they're earning overtime. Prior to earning this overtime pay, they should have approval to work overtime. And then importantly, paid leave cannot be counted towards the hours worked to get them to overtime. This means if I'm working 30 hours in a work week and I want to try to submit 20 hours of paid leave to get overtime, that's going to not be allowed. That same rule for using the paid leave to try to get comp time would also apply. So looking at information about comp time, a non-exempt employee who's worked overtime may gain comp time in lieu of receiving a cash payment on their paycheck for overtime. Again, your division will set the policy about this, so check with divisional HR. For each hour worked over 40, it would convert to 1.5 hours of comp time, and then partial hours are prorated. There's an example, and you'll find some additional examples in the coming up slides as well. As a reminder, an employee will either earn comp time or overtime, not both, if your division is, providing it out. Some more information about comp time, and the majority of the stuff on this slide comes directly from the campus overtime policy. But for banking purposes, employees can bank up to 80 hours of comp time. After that, it has to be paid out as overtime pay, and that's per the policy. Comp time is managed on a calendar year schedule for all employees regardless of category. This can be a little bit confusing for the FLSA folks who are eligible to earn this because they're on a different calendar with fiscal year, but comp time is all strictly managed on a calendar year basis. And then the last bullet point again comes right from the policy, and it's regarding carryover of comp time credits. This is an example with a full-time non-exempt employee who's working 47 hours in a work week. She will get 40 hours of pay at the regular hourly rate and 7 hours of overtime pay. Or if her division requires comp time use instead, she'll get 10.5 hours of comp time earned. There are some options for some of the employee categories to be able to put this in electronically, but for others they have to track it informally, and that is via paper. This is an example for a part-time non-exempt employee who's scheduled to work at a 50% FTE or 20 hours per week. If he works 25 hours in a work week, is he going to get overtime or comp time? No. He's just going to get 20 hours of pay at the regular rate and then an additional 5 hours for the time he went over at the regular rate. As a reminder, all hours worked under 40 in the standard work week are paid at the regular hourly rate or straight time, regardless of assigned FTE. We're now going to move into information about scheduling and hours worked, because folks often have a lot of questions about this if they're moving from exempt to non-exempt. This is a reminder again, a non-exempt employee must be paid overtime or receive comp time credits for every hour worked over 40 in a work week. As a reminder, working over 8 in a day but less than 40 in a work week will not get you to the overtime or comp time. Prior to working overtime or trying to account for comp time, the employee should be receiving approval to do that. We've already talked about how hours worked cannot include paid leave to get you to overtime or to comp time. Check in with your division about their specific requirements. And then again, as a reminder, non-exempt employees are required to record time in the 15-minute increments. What is considered work? We want to talk about this so we can help folks figure out their hours. An employee is working whenever they're performing services for the benefit of the employer. This rule applies whether you're exempt or non-exempt. The bullet points on this slide are going to be some information about the exempt folks. So exempt employees who are typically not eligible for overtime or comp time may be in work status beyond their regularly scheduled hours without being subject to overtime or comp time. They may often have to work over 40 hours per work week. They may be required to work outside the standard office hours. Folks may be required to do work off-site, for example, at home. Divisions, work units, and supervisors can set rules about that. For purposes of non-exempt, again, the same rule applies. An employee is working whenever they are performing services for the benefit of the employer. But with our non-exempt folks, we want to be really careful because they need to be paid for all hours worked. So it's important that we're accurately recording their time. These folks cannot work off the clock, can't volunteer to do their job either, and we'll talk about that more in one of the next slides. Hours worked by an employee without the employer's knowledge or permission can sometimes still result in having to pay out that overtime and comp time. So for any supervisors, we want to make sure that they know what the employees are doing with work hours, and then employees, you want to be letting your supervisors know if you have a workload that you think is going to cause you to go over. Once an employer allows an employee to work or knows that the employee is working or becomes aware, the employee has to be compensated, even if that work was not pre-approved. However, most divisions are going to have a required approval process that you'll need to check in about with your supervisor before you're doing overtime or comp time. In almost all cases, non-exempt employees should refrain from doing work outside of scheduled work hours, and supervisors should refrain from assigning work outside of scheduled work hours. There are a few exceptions depending upon your title and your job responsibilities. This stuff should have already been discussed with you at the time you would have been onboarded. For example, we have some positions where there's emergency services that are required to be provided, and sometimes that'll cause employees to go over into the next shift. This isn't something that would come as a surprise. This is something that folks would already know about as a part of their job. And if you have questions about whether or not your position has some of those emergency exceptions, please talk to your supervisor. What is de minimis work? We want to talk about this so that we can help folks understand if they're working and needing to be compensated or they're doing something really incidental that wouldn't add up to compensation over 40. So again, reminding folks that if non-exempt employees work outside of the scheduled work hours, they may be entitled to overtime or comp time if they're working over 40 and doing something that's more than de minimis. What is de minimis? Insubstantial or insignificant periods of time. It doesn't occur on a regular basis. De minimis work usually consists of uncertain and indefinite time periods. And there's often not a precise or accurate way to track de minimis work. An example would be if I'm checking my email after hours and I'm looking at an email for a couple minutes and then I close my phone and I get on with the rest of my evening at home with my family. I'm not going to be submitting time for that 2 minutes. But if I'm looking at email for 20 minutes, 30 minutes or more and starting to do work, that's going to be adding up to work time. And again, supervisors should set expectations with their employees, and employees should understand what those expectations are about whether or not they're supposed to be answering those things after hours, how much time they're spending doing that, and if it's getting them into the area that would be compensated, to talk about whether or not that's going to be allowed and how that works within your unit. I touched earlier on the fact that supervisors and managers cannot ask an employee to volunteer to do their job. This information is also available in the campus overtime policy. We also get the definitions from the federal regulations. Basically, a person is a volunteer only if the following criteria are met. The services are in a different general occupational category than that of the employee's regular employment. That's when it's allowed. I couldn't volunteer to do my regular job. I couldn't volunteer to come to do one of these forum presentations because this is a part of my regular job if it's going to cause me to go into overtime or comp time and I'm non-exempt. So these are the things I'm not going to read line by line, but when this information is available up on the website, you can refer to it there, and you can also get all of these details in the overtime policy that talks about volunteering. Meal and break periods. These are often really important areas that we want to talk about and make sure folks know what's expected and what's allowed within their work unit. If you're an employee, you want to check in with your supervisor or manager and make sure you understand what the expectations are about meal and break periods. If you're a supervisor, you want to make sure you make those expectations clear to your employees. So let's talk about what's allowed, what's not allowed, what's in policy, etc. Paid time includes meals in which an employee is not completely relieved of duties or meals that are less than 30 minutes. For example, if I'm working while I'm eating my lunch at my desk, and if I'm taking a break that's less than 20 minutes in length. Unpaid time for meal or break usually is about 30 minutes or more, and I would be allowed to completely be relieved of my duties and able to leave my workspace. For non-exempt university staff, we have a campus policy. It's under the HR policies at Chapter 14, Section .01, and the bullet points here come directly from that policy. So if you're non-exempt university staff, that's the expectation by the policy. If your supervisor is going to do something different or your work unit is going to do something different, you want to be checking in with them and find out what that is. For non-exempt academic staff, actually for all categories of employees, we recommend similar breaks, but the policy really only focuses, the campus policy really only focuses on the non-exempt university staff. If they're non-exempt academic staff, there isn't a campus-wide policy that requires those same breaks and rest periods. A reminder to talk with your supervisor. Divisions and units can establish guidelines around all of these rules and requirements about scheduling, about break time, approval processes, all of that. Know what's expected. Ask them. If your supervisor isn't sure or the manager isn't sure, get in touch with your HR office. And you can also reach out to central HR with similar questions if you're not able to get what you need right in your work unit or your division. As a reminder, non-exempt employees may need to use leave time when arriving late or leaving early, 15 minutes or more, because they're required to record time in 15-minute increments. Again, for non-exempt, in most cases, if there's scheduled hours of work, you want to be checking in with your supervisor or manager if you're going to do something different than what the standard schedule is. There are implications if employees are not following policy, process, and procedure. Some examples could include working less than your scheduled daily hours without using leave or without receiving prior approval. Another example is if someone is going over more than what they're supposed to without approval. Sometimes we have these cases where folks consistently go over their 40 hours even though they've been told, not to do that. And that is covered in the third bullet point as well, about prior approval. And then anyone who's deliberately or intentionally failing to accurately record their time. And just as employees have responsibilities and implications if they don't follow the rules, so do the supervisors. We've seen cases where supervisors have allowed or encouraged people to inaccurately report time. That's a problem, and we don't want that to happen, and that has, potential discipline consequences for the supervisor if they do that. And for the same reasons, if they're telling their employee, why don't you go ahead and volunteer for this work so I don't have to pay you the overtime, or document that you're owed comp time. That's not okay. We can't do that. And then if the supervisor is aware of the division's policies and practices on these things and disregards them, fails to communicate them to the employees, we want to know about that. So be in touch with your HR if you have concerns that you're not getting what you need from the supervisors or the managers, or something's being done that violates the policies and the rules. Preparing for the change, what are some things you should think about? Do you know what your standard hours of work are for your work unit? Are they subject to change? Are there flexibilities in there that you may be available to get if you're talking to your supervisor? Find out what's available. What is the call-in or call-off procedure for late arrivals or absences? What's the time approval process? How does your division use overtime or comp time? And then how does that work out in the units? Are any changes permitted to the standard hours? What is the break and the lunch schedule? Ask those questions, and hopefully your supervisor is going to be providing the information you need. And again, if folks aren't clear, feel free to reach out to your HR, feel free to reach out to Workforce Relations as well. And then this is some general resources. I'm going to pass the mic.
So if you know of any individuals who are affected by this change and may need the information provided to them in a different language, we do have this office available, so let us know, get us in contact with us, and we will make sure that the employee gets those resources that they need.